Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kirsten Bayer with the Illinois Center for Specialized Professional Support at Illinois State University, and I will be your moderator and technical support for today's session. Today's technical assistance session is for the Apprenticeship Illinois NOFO Notice of Funding Opportunity, and today's session is a rescheduled session titled Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, or DEI, as we will be referencing it. Today we will be hearing from our presenter, Candace Dickerson, and we'll let her introduce herself in just a second here. A couple of housekeeping things before we get started is that I wanted to reiterate that this session is being recorded, and the recorded session will be up on the Illinois WorkNet Notice of Funding website. We typically have the recordings up within about 48 hours. And then the PowerPoint slide deck will be in correspondence with that recording as well. I will put that website for the NOFO in the chat momentarily here. We also wanted to note that in order to be as accessible as possible, this session is offering closed captioning capabilities. And so you should see those at the bottom of your screen now, but if you do not, please reach out to me via the chat and I will help you turn those on. And then we also wanted to reiterate that this is a Zoom meeting. So while you do have the capability to unmute yourselves, we ask that you refrain from doing so and you hold all questions, comments, or concerns until the end. And then we ask that you address any questions or comments or concerns via the chat. So if you do have a question that comes up and you don't want to forget it, please just post that in the chat and then we will address that at the end of the session. We do that to leave a paper copy and a paper trail or an electronic trail nowadays for ourselves so that we can answer your questions live and timely, but we can also have those questions via the chat and save those and then post those to the FAQ on the Notice of Funding website. So that way others who might have your questions who aren't able to attend this session can also have those questions answered there for them. And I believe that is all the housekeeping items I have. I'm going to hand it off to our presenter today, Candace Dickerson.
Good afternoon, everyone. Happy Tuesday. It's Tuesday, right? Yes. And welcome to today's TA session on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Next slide. So again, I'm Candace Dickerson, the program manager for workforce development for NIU, the Center for Governmental Studies. We work with DCEO to assist with research and support on various agendas. This session will be the why and hows behind incorporating diversity, equity, and inclusion into apprenticeships. Next slide. So the reason behind this session is to better prepare you for understanding DEI as you prepare your application and future work plan, should you be awarded the grant. We will discuss the following: the NOFO targeted populations, diversity, equity, and inclusion in Illinois, workforce plans. We're going to talk about what diversity, equity, and inclusion is and why is it necessary, how you can incorporate it, DEI, into your work plans, and what some resources are for DEI. Next slide. As Kirsten mentioned, this webinar is being recorded and will be posted to the Illinois WorkNet website. In fact, all the TA sessions are listed on this link. Due to procurement, all questions may not be able to be answered during this presentation. However, you may submit your question in the chat, and moving forward, all FAQs must be asked on that site, the NOFO site, and will be answered on the site, and the responses will be updated frequently. Next slide. So if you guys have attended any of our TA sessions in the past, you have noticed we are discussing several targeted populations on various workshops. So the next 2 pages are going to reflect the populations that are being targeted for this NOFO. They're also listed on page 7, and they are low-income individuals, returning citizens or previously incarcerated, homeless individuals, justice-involved youth, youth who are in the foster care system or have aged out of the foster care system, individuals who are English language learners, those who have low levels of literacy, and facing substantial cultural barriers. Next slide. The migrant and seasonal farm workers, single parents, long-term unemployed individuals, older workers, individuals with disabilities, the LGBTQ individuals, and then minorities that are underrepresented in registered apprenticeships in Illinois. These populations were just targeted by the NOFO because they are generally underrepresented and are typically not sought after for various reasons. Like they often have barriers that can prevent success, and many times they're just simply unaware that these opportunities are available to them. Next slide. So Governor Pritzker has an executive order to address workforce equity gaps, and it's listed on the side. It is his work plan executive order number 3. Next slide. So Illinois is looking to be a more diversified, equitable, and inclusive state. Therefore, applications that serve any of the targeted populations that we discussed will be given priority in the merit review process of the grant application. Next slide. Okay, so it's a lot of talk. What is DEI? Diversity, equity, and inclusion are words that are often used interchangeably, but they definitely have different meanings. So I want the slide actually just says what the difference of each definition is, but I'm just going to explain how DEI is relevant regarding apprenticeships. So with diversity, you're going to focus on differentiating the populations that are represented in apprenticeships and that relevant industry. For example, if you're looking to increase the number of persons of color in apprenticeship programs that are predominantly white, or if you're looking to increase the number of women in apprenticeships that are largely male. The equity is going to focus on eliminating the practices or the processes that prevent others from having the same outcomes, like with retention and advancement in the apprenticeship or the relevant industry. Therefore, you should look to examine the biases or the cultural assumptions that disadvantage people of color, women, and others within the selection, evaluation, and advancement processes. And then inclusion is going to be lastly creating an environment that ensures that all individuals feel respected, involved, connected, and valued in their company, and where the employer demonstrates that it does value all ideas, backgrounds, and perspectives for all employees. Next slide. So this is just another slide attempting to show a visual of what equity is. Equity is when every person has what they need to succeed. So showing equity and equality among all means that everyone has what is needed to succeed on an individual basis. Next slide. So why is DEI necessary? Well, the environment in which one person grows up greatly impacts success. A childhood environment is an important driver of Black and white income gaps. There was a study that was done, and this information that we're going to talk about does come from there. Many people believe that in a free market, every person will have the same opportunity to prosper based on their individual abilities. But in reality, it's just not the case. Poverty is largely a result of environmental factors. So I'm going to use my partner, Brian, as an example. I have spoken to him about this, so he is aware that we're going to discuss it. Brian is a white male. He grew up in a decent area. His dad was a mechanic by profession. He was privy to being around other successful auto repair owners in the industry. He learned the terminology. He was offered opportunities to shadow and learn the business anytime he wanted. And he looked like everyone else. Now, I'll use my husband as an example. He's a Black male, grew up on the south side of Chicago. His father wasn't in the home. His mom worked outside the home. He doesn't look like the people in that industry. He wasn't privy to know the terminology. He didn't grow up in an environment and he wasn't offered to learn more about that. However, he did manage to go to one of the most prestigious high schools in the area, a predominantly white male school. And though he was admitted, paid tuition, and graduated from the school, He was never meant to feel inclusive, nor was he offered the same networks and opportunities as his white classmate. So again, being equal is not always being equitable. Next slide. Okay, so this slide is going to kind of further explain that point. So say we have two young boys. This was a study that was done that compared the race and the economic opportunity in the US, in the world of a Black man and the world of a white man. So say we have two young boys, both come from a household that earns $25,000 annually. This study did look at females and Hispanics as well, but this was the largest difference in the outcomes. The ability to move upward in salary is still more significant among whites, which means it's easier for white men to move up. Even for people with the same starting point, whites tend to earn more than their parents did, even if their parents were in poverty. And Black men are set to earn less than what their parents did. So just another gap to show that even if you have the same starting point, some populations may start there and earn higher than their parents did, and some may start there and still actually earn lower than their parents. Next slide. So what is all the talk about DEI these days? The conversations were sparked by 3 crises that happened in 2020. If you watch the news or read articles, you'll notice that DEI has become a topic that has been brought to the top of the conversation for many. This is greatly due in part to the various crises that hit 2020. First, we had the COVID-19 health crisis, where COVID-19 impacted the lives of hundreds of thousands, which led to people losing jobs or not being able to attend work, thus turning into the economic crisis. And finally, a number of unjustified shootings across America has led to societal instability and thus a racial injustice crisis. These 3 crises have sparked the much needed conversations of DEI. Next slide. Again, being diverse, equitable, and inclusive is necessary. Women and people of color need to have access to break into networks and circles of people who can help them get some self-sustaining wage jobs. Apprenticeships are often a great way to help advance careers, but unfortunately, they are just not readily accessible by all. Next slide. So, bringing it back to Illinois, why is DEI necessary in Illinois? Well, the overall workforce in Illinois is about half male, half female, and about 1/3 non-white, which means about 2/3 white. Sounds okay? Okay, so let's look even closer. The chart above shows the occupation, the percent working in that occupation that are female, non-white, and their median hourly wage. So apprenticeships in the higher paying occupations like construction, maintenance, and engineering tend to have a higher percentage of white males. What's even more noticeable is that the construction apprenticeships account for over 85% of all Illinois apprenticeships and are the highest paid, even double in many cases. Healthcare, personal care, things of that nature, are the lowest paid and are often filled by women mostly and non-whites, often at non-life sustaining wages. So while 49% of the workforce in Illinois, or just about half, are female, and about 1/3 are non-white, the majority of the females and non-whites are the lowest of the median hourly earnings. This is why having diversity is necessary. Next slide. So a lot of times people use the term unknowingly referring to people as being diverse. However, referring to people as diverse may actually imply that they are less than those persons in another group. Referring to a person as diverse may actually create division. So the goal of DEI regarding diversity is recognizing the differences in people, whether it's race, ethnicity, sex, gender, identity, national origin, disability, whatever. It's the differences in people that make things diverse. People often use equality and equity interchangeably, but equality and equity are two different concepts when it comes to opportunity. Equality is about giving everybody the same opportunity, while equity involves providing the right resource to level the playing field so that the equal opportunity can yield equal outcome. And then lastly, inclusion is about making everyone feel a sense of belonging, making everyone feel as though his or her opinions and ideas and their voice does actually matter. Next slide. So again, we must remember that DEI is a continuous process to create fairness and build respectful relationships, making sure that there are diversity, equity, and inclusiveness is not a one-time, one program, one person thing. And it does require a conscious effort in many facets to level the playing field, to create fairness, and to preserve dignity. Next slide. Okay, so how would you show that you have included DEI or diversity, equity, and inclusive strategies in your application? Well, projects under this NOFO must include the strategies to address equity. So that needs to include your recruitment practices, showing how you're going to do that. Intentional and inclusive marketing, like including images of women or people of color or those with disabilities in your marketing. Addressing discrimination within the programs and offering support that boosts the retention. As a navigator or even as an intermediary, the applicants are required to address diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI, in the proposal application, and then be able to articulate why and how implementing DEI can be a cost-efficient and cost-effective solution for both the employer and the community. Now we're going to give a couple of more concrete examples. If you go to the next slide. Okay, so a few examples on how to show that you plan to practice effective DEI strategies. So this NOFO has identified several populations that we spoke of earlier that it wants to fund, that they're looking to target to fund. Therefore, you may want your marketing material to include some of these populations. Looking at diversity, for example, if you were looking to recruit women and people of color, you would include women and people of color on your flyers, social media pages, websites, and other marketing materials. Also, just know that it will be important to track your participants' characteristics, like their race, ethnicity, sex, things of that nature, to prove that you are recruiting and enrolling people from those populations. Now, addressing equity, which is about leveling the playing field in your application, you must address and make a plan to minimize or remove employment barriers for the targeted population. And lastly, to make people feel a sense of belonging or included, you must be able to first communicate with them. So for example, if you're looking to attract ESL, English as Second Learner persons to feel a sense of belonging, you may consider creating marketing materials in both English and other languages. Next slide. So navigators too will need to be able to show evidence or prove that they will be strategically putting DEI into action if awarded. So they must develop and implement business outreach strategies, including minority business owners, cultivate business champions who embrace and practice DEI, support the diversification of apprenticeships into new industries and occupations, and then be able to expand apprenticeships for the underrepresented and targeted population. Again, equity and equality are not the same thing. It's going to take more effort to advertise to these targeted populations. It's not about giving everyone an equal chance to sign up for the program. Remember, my husband was actually in the school and he got to attend the school. But you want to make sure that you talk to them to see how they will support this population and making them equitable and feel included. Next slide. Intermediaries will also need to show evidence of how they will strategically implement DEI into their plans on their application. So first, let's look at where you're recruiting the candidates from. Should be looking into a wide range of partners like the community-based organizations such as women or youth serving organizations, your neighborhood centers, affordable housing groups, churches. Also prepare and be ready to provide support to the participant to be in an apprenticeship. You can do this by looking to create strong job readiness programs or pre-apprenticeships. Just remember and take note that it has been shown that minority candidates cancel apprenticeships at a higher rate than whites, as well as women tend to cancel at a higher rate than men. And this is generally just due to common barriers such as unsupportive work environments, poorly designed programs, childcare, things of that, transportation, things of that nature. Next slide. Okay, so this is a graph where we're just talking about diversity, not just being about skin color. So working age people with disabilities are much less likely to be employed than people without disabilities in all racial and ethnic groups. And the chart there shows that. So the definition that I'm going to give of disability is in conformance with the American Disabilities Act of 1990 and also the Illinois Human Rights Act. A disability means one who has a physical or a mental impairment that substantially limits one or more of the major life activities of that individual. However, a person's disability may not always be apparent, nor would it necessarily inhibit them from taking a job if they can perform the required duties with or without accommodations. For more information regarding persons with disabilities, there was a TA session that was done on apprenticeship opportunities for the disabled on July 21st, and that is posted on the NOFO website. Next slide. So these are some resources that a lot of the information has come from in this presentation, as well as resources that will be very useful to you in the future. Jobs for the Future is a great website and a great organization that talks a lot about diversity in jobs for the youth. That's an article there, as well as the Workforce GPS. A lot of you are familiar with that if you work with WEO or things of that nature. They often have a lot of articles and webinars and things focusing on apprenticeships and DEI as well. Next slide. Apprenticeship.gov is a great resource as well, where you can find these following articles, but others as well. And next slide, I think we've made it to the end. Yeah, so remember that all questions regarding this NOFO must be submitted in writing to the apprenticeship@illinoisworknet.com. You may be familiar with that if you've already submitted questions that you want to answer in this process since the bidders conference, but send all questions there. And now we'll take a look at the chat to see if there's anything that we can answer today. And if not, again, we will have those questions answered and posted on the website.
Doesn't look like there's anything in the chat so far.
Okay. Are there any questions from anyone right now?
There are not. And please, I wanted to reiterate to post any questions in the chat. I don't see any right now, Candace, though.
All right, well, hopefully that means we covered a lot. I know that's a lot to take in, and it's one part of the grant application, but it's a very heavy part. So we want to make sure that you have all the resources that you need to be able to write to that, to understand that, to share with your partners and employers and things of that nature. And just feel free to reach out if you have any questions or concerns.
And the slides will be posted along with the presentation on the NOFO webpage, so you can have access to all of those links that are included as well.
Thanks, Brian.
Yes, thank you so much, everyone. Have a great rest of your afternoon.
All right, thank you.